Up to 100,000 jobs. 4 German plants. That was the scale of a restructuring Volkswagen's CEO reportedly floated in July 2026, a proposal the supervisory board did not approve. The company that once defined German industrial might was now considering the largest workforce reduction in its history. Not because of a single scandal, not because of one bad quarter, but because the economic model that built Volkswagen into a 10 million vehicle a year empire had quietly become unsustainable. Between 2021 and 2025, profit margins were halved. First quarter 2026 profit fell 28% to approximately 1.6 billion euros. Shares lost more than half their value in 3 years, and US tariffs were projected to cost the company 5 billion euros annually, a direct strike at an export-dependent business model. The numbers were not abstractions. They were the vital signs of a system under structural pressure. So what broke the model that once made Volkswagen untouchable? For half a century, that promise was not just fulfilled, it was a marvel. From the ashes of post-war Europe, Volkswagen became the primary engine of West Germany's reconstruction. More than a company, it was a national project. The mandate was simple: build reliable, affordable cars for the masses, and rebuild a nation's industrial pride along the way. The system worked, creating a cycle of production, export, and prosperity that defined an era. The Beetle was the mechanism. It became a global icon, a symbol of accessible German engineering conquering markets from America to Brazil. This phenomenal success hardwired a core logic into Volkswagen's corporate DNA. Growth would be led by high-volume exports from its German heartland. The entire operational and financial structure was optimized for this single purpose. German factories were the center of the universe. This economic engine was stabilized by a unique social contract. Co-determination gave labor representatives powerful seats on the supervisory board, creating a formal partnership between management and the workforce. It guaranteed social peace, high wages, and job security in exchange for productivity and quality. A fortress of consensus, built to shield the German industrial worker from the market storms. The model was celebrated as a paradigm of stakeholder capitalism. The architecture was flawless for its time, creating an empire of unprecedented scale. But the world was changing. The very consensus that made Volkswagen strong, the very commitment to its German workforce that defined its identity, was slowly becoming a strategic trap. The fortress had no escape plan, and a storm was gathering just beyond its walls. By 2015, the Volkswagen Group had reached what seemed to be its final, perfected form. At least, that's what everyone believed. A global colossus. An empire of brands stretching from budget hatchbacks to six-figure hypercars, with annual production capacity cresting 10 million vehicles. This was the logical endpoint of the German export model: total market saturation. Diesel technology, celebrated for its efficiency, wrapped in the engineering prestige only Germany could claim, fueled record profits and gave the company an air of technical invincibility. And China, once a frontier, had matured into the firm's primary profit engine, generating the cash needed to sustain the vast, complex German mothership. Every metric pointed upward: revenue, volume, market share. The dashboard glowed green across the board. The system appeared self-perpetuating. Engineering dominance, feeding financial success funding more engineering. Volkswagen wasn't just winning the game, it had seemingly perfected it. The fortress built decades earlier now cast a shadow over the entire industry. But inside the fortress, critical failures were being ignored. The multi-brand strategy, designed for market coverage, had spawned a labyrinth of internal complexity. Parts, platforms, and processes multiplied without discipline. Each brand chased its own ambitions, building redundant systems like rival kingdoms sharing a single treasury. This unchecked expansion meant structural costs were rising relentlessly, buried beneath the headline revenue figures pouring in from Asia. The focus on volume concealed a growing rot at the core. The company had become so large and intricate that structural fragilities accumulated across the system. It was like a cathedral whose foundations were cracking, but nobody could hear it over the choir. The very scale that projected strength was now masking a profound vulnerability. The first major crack, when it came, would not arrive from a market downturn or a competitor's innovation. It would come from inside the engine itself, from software engineered to cheat emissions tests. a deception at the heart of the technology that symbolized Volkswagen's dominance. And the bill for that deception would be staggering. The first fissure opened in 2015. The diesel emissions scandal was a profound breach of trust. But more critically, it was a costly distraction. Management resources were consumed by legal battles and regulatory penalties, pulling eyes off the road just as the global landscape began to shift beneath them. The autopilot was on. The road was curving. While Volkswagen was occupied with its past sins, new threats were gathering. In China, partners were becoming predators. Local EV makers rapidly out-innovated their German counterparts, peeling away market share with ruthless speed. Simultaneously, a new front opened in the West. U.S. tariffs were expected to impose an estimated €5 billion annual cost burden, a direct strike at the jugular of the export-dependent model. The fortress wasn't just under assault, it was surrounded. The financial consequences were brutal and swift. Between 2021 and 2025, profit margins were halved. First quarter 2026 profit fell 28% to approximately €1.6 billion. The market delivered its own verdict. Shares had lost more than half their value in the last 3 years. Billions in shareholder value, gone, like exhaust in the wind. The numbers were no longer abstractions. They were vital signs of a system under structural pressure. The high costs and rigidities of the German industrial base, once a source of strength, had become an anchor dragging the entire group down. Faced with this pressure, the supervisory board convened in July 2026. Their response was a plan to reduce the company's global model lineup by up to 50%, a drastic simplification of the product portfolio that had defined the group's identity for decades. It was a bid to staunch the bleeding through radical simplification. The board bought itself time with product cuts. But a far more explosive proposal had been floated: cuts to the workforce itself. And the battle over it was just beginning. The product cuts were only the beginning. Behind the scenes, CEO Oliver Blume had floated a far more radical proposal: the elimination of up to 100,000 jobs, roughly 1 in 6 workers worldwide. A number that landed like a grenade in Wolfsburg. The plan named 4 German plants specifically: Hanover, Emden, Zwickau, and Audi's Neckarsulm site, for potential closure. For the communities built around these factories, this was not a restructuring. It was an eviction notice. Tens of thousands of families faced an uncertain future, their livelihoods caught in a structural vice they had no power to escape. The social contract that had guaranteed security for generations was now officially on the negotiating table. The response from labor was swift and absolute. Unions warned of a major conflict and organized protests across Germany. This was no empty threat. Under Germany's co-determination model, labor representatives hold half the seats on Volkswagen's supervisory board. A governance structure that made the workforce not just employees but stakeholders with institutional teeth. Management's push for radical cuts collided head-on with a workforce that refused to absorb the cost of leadership's strategic miscalculations. The board reached no consensus on the 100,000. A political deadlock. The fortress of consensus, once the company's greatest source of stability, had become a cage, but other measures moved forward regardless. Volkswagen's plan could reduce variants or equipment options by up to 75%. The target was to bring production capacity down to around 9 million vehicles annually. The bleeding was slowed, not stopped. The German model didn't just stumble. It hit a wall built by its own hands. And what comes after the collapse of a consensus? That is the lesson. Volkswagen's crisis reveals a structural vulnerability, not in its engineering, but in its architecture. The German model itself, once a fortress of strength, has become a source of institutional paralysis. The pillars of that model, co-determination, state ownership, centralized production, form an iron triangle of inertia. Labor representatives hold half the supervisory board seats, giving them the power to veto necessary but painful restructuring. The state of Lower Saxony, a key shareholder, prioritizes regional employment over ruthless global competitiveness. 3 forces, each rational in isolation, locked in a mutual embrace that resists change. This governance structure was designed for stability in a predictable world. It makes rapid adaptation difficult in a volatile one. And the economics have shifted. Germany's high labor and energy costs were once a justifiable premium, the price of engineering supremacy and social peace. That premium has eroded. Chinese competitors are closing the technology gap with speed, and US tariffs are punishing the export-heavy model. The math is under pressure. Volkswagen is paying for a system that strains under modern cost realities. The pivot to regionalized production is an acknowledgement the old way faces structural pressure. But it may be too little too late. The problem isn't just operational, it's structural. And that's the lesson, not just for automakers, but for any legacy institution built on consensus. The systems designed to protect an organization can, in an era of disruption, become constraints on its ability to adapt. Volkswagen's fortress of consensus secured its prosperity for decades. Now it complicates its response. The board couldn't agree on 100,000 cuts. The plan to reduce the model lineup moved forward instead, a compromise that addresses symptoms while the structural questions remain. If this analysis of Volkswagen's profit decline helped you see the warning signs, a like helps us reach more curious minds. What other legacy industry do you see trapped between its historic governance and modern market realities? Drop your answer below.